What's up, everybody? This is part 4 of the interview with Sean McDowell and Voddie Baucham about critical race theory and its compatibility with Christianity. Man, we did part 3 and we finally got into some critical race theory stuff. I feel like I'm arguing with the video, but I would love to talk with these guys in person, but I'm just reacting to the video with some of the things that I feel about the conversation, and I want you to do the same. I want you to jump into the comment section and have a spirited debate. I'm recording these kind of all at the same time, so these videos are going to come I'm not going to be responsive to your comments in the videos because I haven't seen them yet. I haven't posted these yet. I'm going to post them later, but I will try to be in the comment section with you to discuss and rebut or to agree with whatever it is you want to agree with. A reminder again, the community is a safe community for us to disagree and come together. Any trolls or negative and demeaning comments will be tagged and eventually blocked if they continue. We want to create a space where we can think well, we can discuss, argue, grow, not argue, disagree, grow, in a healthy and respectful way with a Christian worldview, with a Christian way of thinking about things. So I'm going to make videos that encourage that sort of thinking and challenging. And I'm looking for a community who can disagree well and agree well and push and prod and grow and challenge each other. There's not a lot of places on the internet for that. So I hope we can find our little oasis here on this channel. All right, so let's continue. Oh, if you haven't liked and subscribed, if you want to be part of that community, we want to get this group up as quickly as possible. I would love to get to 1,000 followers ASAP. So let's try to get to that 1,000 followers. We're nowhere near it. Probably, I think right now, the point of this video, about 48, something like that. So we got a long way to go. So if you like what we're doing here, go ahead and like and subscribe and help the channel out. Hit the notification bell and you'll get notified on all of the recent updates. All right, let's continue.
Gotcha. Good clarification, by the way. So do you think there's anything positive within CRT at all? And let me qualify that before you answer. One of the ideas that's often connected with CRT is that systemic racism is embedded in institutions, not just individuals. And then it's a tool to find ways to analyze that, bring it to the surface, etc. In some ways, I look at that and I go, we shouldn't be surprised that there would be institutional racism because we believe in original sin and it affects everything. So would you say, from your perspective, there's anything positive in CRT, or any positives could just be found elsewhere?
But you gotta follow that through, though. They don't just say that racism is embedded in institutions. They define racism as disparate outcomes. Again, that's why the worldview of CRT is inseparable from our discussions.
Okay. All right. So, man, first of all, racism is not defined by inequities. The definition of racism in critical race theory is prejudice with power, not inequities. We talked about this in the last video. Voddie Baucham wants to make social justice a conversation about resources and redistribution of resources, which is code word and dog whistle for socialism, Marxism, communism, and all those things. But the reality is that the conversation around social justice that most people are having is about experiences and violations of opportunities and rights, unjust violations of opportunities and rights. And because these two conversations are keep overlapping, wherever it's convenient, Voddie brings in this inequities thing. Now, we discussed in the last video that discrimination equals disparities. And so these inequities that show up in these disparities in these reports, discrimination always leads to disparities. That's my point that I'm making. And so therefore, if you have disparities there's at least the potential that discrimination led to that disparity. Now, the opposite is not true. Disparities are not always the result of discrimination. And so therefore, it can be true that upon researching the disparity, you don't find any discrimination, but other reasons or other valid reasons led to that disparity that don't make it unjust at all. It just makes it, it just makes it natural and normal. And that's what would normally happen. But if you have a disparity, in that disparity, I called it smoke. It's smoke to a potential fire. And you should go, if you think you smell smoke, you better go and check it every time. And so if there's enough disparities, then you will see trending disparities. Then yes, an investigation should be looked into to say, hey, something feels discriminatory that's leading to these disparities. We talked about that in the last video. So now he's saying that critical race theorists say that all disparities are the result of race injustice. I would disagree with that. I don't think that critical race theorists say that because there's a disparity, there is injustice. But I would say that critical race theorists, after seeing a broad trend of disparities, are heavily suspicious that discrimination is a heavy factor in that disparity, and are calling for us to go back and take a look to make sure that is not the case, certainly in our legal and legislative and political policies. And so, number one, Voddie, racism is not disparities. That's not how it's defined. It's defined by prejudice with power. Prejudice with power is speaking to an experience, not to an outcome. And so racism is about experiences. And so you're not going to be able to continue to change the subject in that way.
About CRT, right? And so they're going about.
Also, notice he did not answer the question. The question is there anything in CRT that is right? And he goes on to say, you got to take it all the way through. That's not the question. The question is not, is all of CRT right? If the question was if all of CRT is right, then yes, you got to take it all the way through. But if the question is there anything right in CRT? And of course, he doesn't deal with that. He wants to talk about his wholesale concept.
Out it the completely wrong way, and they're making assumptions that are born out of a broken system and worldview. So when they use the word racism, they're not even talking about the same thing. They're not talking about prejudice in hearts of people towards other races. That's why they believe only white people are racist, right? So for example,
no, critical race theory believe that only. Okay, let me finish.
There's a recent rise in crimes against Asians, violent crimes against Asians, racially motivated violent crimes against Asians. Now, the largest number of those crimes are being committed by Black people. Now, that is a huge problem for people who argue that racism is, prejudice plus power. Therefore, people who are not part of the hegemonic power.
There it is. There's racism is prejudice plus power. Did you hear him say it? So he does know. He does know that critical race theory says that racism is prejudice plus power, which has absolutely nothing to do with resources. Okay, I'll let him continue.
Power cannot be racist, because by that definition, you'd have to say that those really weren't racially motivated crimes, because Black people can't be racist. So a professor at, I believe it was University of Colorado, wrote an article, Asian professor.
Okay, Asian professor, we'll get back to that. Before he gets into the explanation, to have the conversation that he's having, you've got to talk about what white means, right? So he says that only white people can be racist. Now, in the theory, now this isn't my belief. I'm about to say what the theory said. Well, it is my belief that race is a social construct. So race is a social construct, meaning it's a category that we place groups into. And that category has in it, various traits and behaviors and styles and traditions that fit into it. A certain a norm. It has a norm attached to it. And so in America, the social construct of white people is not indicative of a skin color. It's indicative of the traits inside the category of white, right? What is a white person? A white person, oftentimes, most of the time, white persons, it is skin based. It's assumed that the people who have the skin of light skin, have these traits that are in the white social construct. But you don't need to have white skin to exhibit the white supremacist construct behavior. And one of the things in the white supremacist construct behavior is this hierarchical view of ethnic races, with, of course, white being at the top and everybody else having to fight for their spots underneath him or her. In this case, it's probably him. So when we say, when critical race theory says only white people can be racist, what they're saying is the construction of white, anyone who fits under the category of the socially constructed white man, right, and the categories therein, those people can't be racist. I would make the case that all of us act with white supremacy, have moments when white supremacy affects the way we see the world and the way we see things. And I think it happens to us because of the environment that we grew up in. Let me try to explain this real quick. America is a greenhouse for racism, particularly racism, the sort of racism that pits white at the top of a value hierarchy, if you will, white supremacy, right? So it's a greenhouse for that. Now the greenhouse is not the plant in it, right? So you can't you don't call the greenhouse a weed, but weeds can grow in a greenhouse, right? In fact, if you're not careful, if you don't want them to grow, you're going to have to actively deal with them, because if a weed gets into a greenhouse, it's going to grow because the environment is there to produce that. America was constructed as a greenhouse, and critical race theorists would say that in that greenhouse is the right environment to produce racism and racialized discrimination. Therefore, anything in the greenhouse will likely, catch on to the environment or grab the pieces of that environment, and you may end up acting and behaving in ways that you wouldn't do if you weren't in this greenhouse. I'll give you one more example. If a child grows up in an exotic dance club, right? Maybe the mom is working at the club, and mom's an exotic dancer, but she can't, she's not having babysitters or anything like that. So she's got to bring the kid with her to work. And so the kid is just grown and experiences this exotic club environment, this greenhouse for exotic club, growth environments. And that kid, if that kid stays there and grabs and catches, if you will, all these different things that the environment is teaching the kid without actually teaching the kid, there's going to be views and things that child thinks about exotic dancing that is different than the way you and I think about it, who didn't grow up in that environment. The fact that he or she, that child, grew up in that environment automatically causes them to have a particular view, or cause them to pick up certain things that are inherent in that environment. I'm not saying that the child is inevitably going to be an exotic dancer themselves, or a club owner, or a bartender, or even a patron, right? In that exotic club. But what I am saying is that there are going to be some things that they see and they catch, and some attitudes and habits that they may grab onto, and perspective that they have that will be definitively affected by that environment that they grew up in, that will be completely different than the child that grew up in an environment that wasn't an exotic club dancing environment. Because the environment matters, is as much important to the shaping of the individual as many other factors. And so critical race theory says we started this country with race as a key feature for how laws were done. And it was only 60 years ago that we finally tried to get some of that stuff right. Finally got it all the way right, right? And the reality is that there still is air in the room that makes it ripe for racism to grow. CRT says, let's continue to look and find where those places are so that we make it so that racism no longer has room to grow here. That is what CRT is kind of going after. That's what that's why we talk about institutional and systemic racism as opposed to individual racism. I say we. I'm not a critical race theorist, so I shouldn't say we. But the reality, but that's what that is. Now, most critical race theorists will both agree that there's individual racist and racism in the system, in the institutionalized space. And those two need not be mutually exclusive. In fact, they aren't. You need the individual to create the system. So it shouldn't be hard to understand that crooked people create crooked systems. And even if the crooked person becomes straight, if you don't fix the system, then you're still going to get crooked outcomes.
Wrote an article that basically explained that even the violent crimes by Black people against Asians is rooted in white supremacy. And you have to do that in order for people to not look at the man behind the curtain, right? Because how are you on the one hand going to say, we got this huge problem with, racist, violent crimes against Asians, and on the other hand say that the people who commit most of those are from a group that by definition can't be racist.
Okay, so I explained a lot of that. Let me also say that I do think Black people can be racist, and so I disagree with critical race theorists about that. But I also think we need to understand what is meant by white and Black people in that particular scenario, and this hegemony that he's talking about, which is again defined by the categorical social construction of white, not necessarily by skin color, even though they run congruent for most of the time. That is
self-contradictory. So the way that you get around that is this sleight of hand that says, no, everything is racist, and everything is racist because America is inherently racist, and America is inherently you see what I'm saying? It all goes back to the worldview.
No, America is not inherently racist. America is a racist environment, though. And it was certainly that. And we're trying to eradicate that racism out of the environment so that racism has a harder time living here. But of course, we have a difference in opinion in that.
It's inseparable.
So you've described CRT a number of times as a worldview, and you kind of talk about it that way in your book. As you know, there's some people who have pushed back pretty strong and said CRT is not a worldview. This language would not be used to describe it, kind of historically speaking. Are you saying it's a worldview because there's examples of how it's defined that way? Or are you saying when you actually look at it and people put it into practice, it becomes a worldview whether or not people describe it that way? Tell me exactly where you land on that and why.
No, I'm saying both. When you look at, for example, I cite Delgado, the sort of seminal work on critical race theory, and I give those 4 basic tenets of critical race theory, right? Those 4 basic tenets of critical race theory, they're worldview orientations.
Okay.
They're not analytical tools, right? Those are the worldview assumptions that underlie critical race theory.
Okay, so here's where again I disagree here. Number one, a tenet is not a worldview statement. A series of ideas and sort of analytical conclusions is not a worldview. Although some worldviews are the result of analytical conclusions. But let's talk about the critical race theory tenets. So we have race is a social construction. That race is aberrant. Well, let me before we get into those. Critical race theory is an examination of American history, primarily. It is not an examination of human history throughout the years, throughout the ages. Critical race theory is very specifically dealing with American history. Critical race theory is not trying to explain why the Egyptians had the slaves, the Israelites as slaves. That's not what it's trying to explain. It's not trying to go comb through all of history and say, this is the way human behavior across all centuries work, which is what a worldview would do. The worldview would tackle large global and transitional periods over time. Critical race theory is dealing with American history. That's not a worldview. That's a look at American history. And in American history, it says that white is a social construction in American history. Okay. That whiteness is, that racism is not aberrational, meaning that racism is ordinary and to be expected. Okay. In America is what he's talking about. He's not talking about Australia. He's talking about America. He's not talking about China. He's talking about America. These are not that's what he's talking about. That's what they're talking about. Whiteness is property in America. It's not, again, these are not worldview statements. Storytelling. Was it? I forget the proper name of it. But it's the aspect of saying, hey, the truths that we know about racist history can be gathered from the facts and from the stories of those who lived them. And so we should include the stories of those who lived them in our collection of facts so that we get the truth, the full truth of racist history. That's America for the most part. And even if that particular one is not America, it's not a worldview. A worldview that you should, it's a worldview that you don't just have facts, but you have experiences with facts to get what is true and real. That's not a worldview. Interest convergence, that the white man acts in his interests, and that primarily that white person or the white communities do not do the right thing if their interest is not aligned with that right thing. Okay, you could agree or disagree with it, but that's not a worldview statement. That's 5. I just gave you 5 statements. Tell me how race is ordinary. Racism is ordinary. Tell me how race is as a construction. Race is a social construction. Tell me how interest convergence. Tell me how whiteness is property. Tell me how I wish I got the storytelling one. Tell me how those are your tenets. I gave you 5. He said 4. Tell me how those are worldviews. Tell me how that explains what's happening in Israel. CRT isn't even trying to explain what's happening in Israel with those things. It's not a worldview. It's a series of conclusions from research that you can agree or disagree with. It's a critical race theory. It's a theory. It's not a worldview. It's a product of social sciences. It's a product, social sciences. And a theory has come out as a result of it. It's not a worldview. It's not trying to be a worldview. It's not competing on the worldview stage. Stop trying to make it be something it's not. It is a theory of conclusions.
They're not just tools. They're an ideology, and they're assumptions that have to be brought to bear. They're a set of glasses that you have to put on, of lenses.
A set of glasses is not a worldview. I get the picture, but that's not. And even then, I don't even think that they're a set of glasses. They're a theory. It's what they are. They're here's a way to explain this. Here's a theory for explaining why we've come to this place. That's what they are. They're a theory.
This is through which you have to view things in order to understand them according to critical race theory. And I think it's undeniable.
You would. Because you're attaching it to
on my channel a few people from different perspectives
Marxism.
Who see this differently, understand it differently. And one of the bigger questions I've asked, and we even framed this conversation this way, is how do we have unity? And you mentioned in your book, you said you want clarity and you want unity.
Yeah.
Even though there's differences among how to approach things like CRT today. How do we do that? Especially, your book is a pretty strong call against CRT. How do we combine like a strong call against something with saying, but we still have unity within the gospel? What does that look like practically speaking?
Well, we have unity within the gospel, but we can't have unity with CRT. That would be like saying we could have unity with Hinduism, right? Who would be saying, we've got these people who are, embracing
unity with CRT is not the same as unity with Buddhism. CRT is a way to explain outcomes and a compilation of research of American legislative history and a theory to explain social behavior in America. This is an issue that we can disagree on and keep moving. We don't have to draw a line here to say, if you agree with this, we can't be unified. This is not something that should disunify us. We can disagree about it. We can disagree about portions of it and agree about whatever we can. But this is a B doctrine. Again, Romans 14 covers this. We can have these two things working, believing that both sides are working toward what they believe God wants them to work toward. And along the way with our discipleship, while doing it together, we'll learn some things. But it certainly is not anti-Bible, anti-God. There's nothing about those tenets I just told you that's anti-God, anti-Christ. There's nothing that presents a new religion, a new gospel, as people say. There's nothing that does those things. It's a side doctrine. It's like disagreeing about which barbecue is good.
Hinduism, but we're brothers in Christ. So how do we have unity, while they're embracing Hinduism and we're not embracing Hinduism? The answer is we don't. We can't, because Hinduism is inherently in opposition to the truth of the gospel, and critical race theory is inherently in opposition to the truth of the gospel.
Yeah, there's nothing about critical race theory that is inherently against the truth of the gospel. Yeah, we've talked about a lot of things. Nothing that we have talked about has had anything to do with our salvation and our relationship with God, and these conversations effect on it. It's not. It just doesn't. It doesn't even touch the gospel. It's in a completely different category. It's talking about American civics. It's not talking about atonement and the eternal destiny of human beings. The fact that people keep making these leaps is beyond frustrating.
This thing has to be exposed.
So you would say that you understand this is one of the biggest issues facing the church today, and we got to speak out on it boldly and clearly.
Absolutely.
Now, obviously, if you make that bold of a statement and you do in your book, there's going to be some people who are going to say you're a sellout, and probably put a number of labels upon that. Give me your thoughts on how you respond to that.
I write them in the book.
Okay, and I read it. I want to hear you articulate that.
I'm saying I write those labels. I write those labels.
Oh yes, you do.
Yeah. There are a number of labels, and again, the way that I respond to that is by pointing out the inconsistency. Right, like if you're saying that I'm a sellout, then what you're also saying is there's only one way for Black people to think, which is actually kind of racist, right?
Okay, you're doing all right. I don't think, for the record, I don't think that Voddie Baucham is a sellout. I legitimately think Voddie Baucham cares for the affairs of God and is pursuing his devotion and following his convictions for what he believes God has called him to do and say and speak. And I believe that is real. So I think he's biblically driven. If he's sold out to God, not to white man. And if that's the case, so am I. I don't find my identity in blackness. I don't have this conversation for social justice for the sake of Black people alone. I do it because for me, Christ has called me to love others, and that is the best way that I become like him. And so this is what it looks like for me. Now, Voddie says something and thinks differently than me about those things, but I don't think that makes him any less fervent a Christ follower. He might think that of me, but I don't think that of him. So I don't think he's sold out or any of that. However, here comes the false dichotomies. It's a false dichotomy now to say, just because you must say that either I think like you or I'm a sellout, that means that you either think that all Black people think the same or they don't. And that's a gross simplification for why someone might be, quote unquote, sold out. So people sell out all the time. And it ain't because they don't think the same way. There's other factors associated with that. And again, the argumentation is beneath him. All right, we're almost done here.
So either I'm not a sellout, but just an example of the broad spectrum of thought within Black people, or I am a sellout, in which case you've just admitted that you've stereotyped all Black people.
Wow. That's a bold way to put it. Well, those of you who join us, we're here with Voddie Baucham. We want to leave some time for questions. There's a ton of comments. Quite a few people saying they're just glad.
Okay. So it looks like they're going to go into some comments, and so that gives us an out here. So their interview is over. I'm going to do one more and kind of go through the comments with them. Obviously, I disagree with Voddie Baucham on a lot of this, way more than I thought I'd disagree with him on this. But I was hoping to come in and be able to say, well, I agree with this. I agree with this. As I said, I think he's acting out of his convictions. I think he believes what he's saying. I don't think he's doing it to curry favor or to appease the white man or any of these things. I do think that Voddie is a devoted follower of Jesus, a preacher of the gospel who, like all of us, are on a sanctification journey. And, either he's got some learning to do or I do but I don't know why we can't walk the pathway together while we're learning. You know what I'm saying? I don't know why our disagreement would mean that we have to go different pathways, but that we can help and spur each other along toward godly works and good things. And so that's my view of it. And that's why I feel like I can fiercely disagree with Voddie, but still respect him as a man of God and a teacher of God. Where I disagree, I just disagree, and I'll explain why. And I explain why those things are, in as jumbly a way as I can. If you are still here and you want to respond to any, again, I hope you've already been responding to different things in the video. I'd love to see your comments and have you comment. You guys talk with each other, learn from each other. Again, we want to keep it safe and not make personal attacks. Any personal attacks will be eliminated, and those people will be kicked out of this community, banned from this community, because we just don't want to have that. There's plenty of internet for you to go and be troll in. It won't be in this community. So if you're looking for a safe place, want to be a part of a safe place where we can converse things, this is it. I hope you join us. Hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell. My name is Antoine Malone. I love you. God loves you as well. And I'll see you next time.